All right. So, hi, Takes. Good to be with you this afternoon. Really great to have this time together this Friday afternoon talking about what I think is a fascinating issue for anyone in business, HR professionals, people who are recruiting individuals into their organization. Now, you've written this article entitled Hindsight is Always Clearer Than Foresight. Why personality assessments matter. This got my attention when I first read it because I thought, I've done these things. I've done them in You Magazine, I've done them online, and I'm looking forward to hearing what differentiates the quality personality assessments from maybe some of the free ones that we are suckered into when we're scrolling through Facebook. But before we jump into that, Takes, perhaps we can look a little bit at the concept of personality. We talk about personality assessments. It seems almost that you could assess a personality, but what is personality and how is it different to, let's say, competency or behavior or experience or knowledge or wisdom?
Yeah, thank you, Justin, and thank you to everyone who's watching. It's lovely to be here. It's a great question because often it's a term that's used loosely, and I like to use an analogy to kind of describe it. So, if you imagine a city and it has these structures and buildings and there's roads, there's all this infrastructure that lays out the city. It's enduring, it doesn't change over time. That's quite what, if I could use the analogy, that's what personality is like. And you have cars and taxis and lane closures and things happen. And that's very much your day-to-day behavior. It represents your day-to-day behavior. So you can have a traffic jam in the middle of the day. You can't predict that. People can show different behaviors throughout the day. That's a bit like behavior. That's our day-to-day interactions and so forth. But personality are those enduring characteristics. So despite there being a traffic jam, despite there being a lane closure, those routes are still the same. And they're still guiding where an individual goes. And personality is very much that. It influences out those guiding characteristics that are long lasting, those enduring characteristics that guide our interactions, how we engage with others, how we find meaning and purpose in life. And yeah, it's different from the day-to-day behaviors.
So does that imply that that personality is fixed? You equate it to the infrastructure of a city or a town, which makes sense. Is it fixed? And if so, I'm curious as to what age it gets fixed. Is that fixed from a young age? Is that something we inherit genetically from our parents, or does it take time for that to get fixed into position like that?
Yeah, and again, it's the nature-nurture debate that you're raising right now, right? And so there are characteristics within us, sometimes they call it traits, that's enduring over a period of time. And there's some people claim that you can fundamentally change it, but it can be managed. And that's how I like to see it. That there's some things about us that aren't going to fundamentally change, but if we're aware of it and we can manage it, then we know what to do in those situations. So, for example, I might be a very detailed orientated person and needing things to be in the right way, right? And that can be a positive thing. If I'm doing something, then I can really focus on getting it just right and so. But in other situations, that can be a complete derail. It can be a complete limitation. Being aware of it allows me to manage that.
Yeah, so what it makes me think, and this comes back to personality assessments, is that they can almost hold a mirror up to us to see some of those blind spots in our personality, which are not necessarily bad things, but they can be, when taken to their extreme, as you call them, derailers, which can impact on our work life, our social life, or everything else. So it really is a mirror that we hold up to ourselves.
Absolutely. And we like to think that we know and understand ourselves fully, but we have, like any human being, biases and we can miss things. And often that's the case when we look in a workspace of when we promote someone, when we hire someone, they can come across really well, very strong, and they might even have a good track record that has brought them to that point. However, we can miss those things. So yes, we get them into the new position, and then suddenly we realize, hey, this individual is struggling with delegating. This individual is being defensive when I'm giving them support. This individual is getting angry and I can't understand why. What did I miss? And those are the things that personality assessments, good personality assessments, and scientific and valid personality assessments can pick up.
Okay, and we'll come to that because I want to know how we identify the robust personality assessments. And so let's just bring it down to real personal brass tacks, some stories. I know as industrial psychologists, for example, and People Smart, you have a battery of assessments that you can run on people. And I know that you've had to train in them, you've had to get licensed in those things, you've had to develop competencies around them. And to that extent, you've taken a lot of personality assessments yourself, right, over your years of training. Have you got some stories, some examples of personality assessments or traits that they have shown you about yourself that you went, I didn't know that? And because I've seen people taking assessments and sometimes they go, that's definitely not me. The assessment's got this thing wrong. And then over time they go, actually, now that I see it, I realize it is me and I can do something about that. Have you had experience of that in doing these assessments yourself?
Yeah, thank you for that, Justin. And you're talking to the self-awareness, just a tool. And that's how we describe assessments. Just see it as a moment in time, as a tool or a vehicle in which to gain greater insight into yourself and to understand. Maybe there are things that are happening that I'm unaware of and to bring that to your awareness. And I've had tons of those moments. Like you said, we do countless assessments when we're being trained in it so that we can then effectively use it with clients. And when we go through that process, I've learned so much about myself. For example, I vividly remember how I did a personality assessment and picked up that, yeah, I'm a big picture and a big picture thinker, and that's a good thing. It can be good in certain circumstances, but pressure that can also limit me. It can influence whether I implement ideas or problem solve in a practical and actionable way. And that was a real eye-opener for me. And it's something that I take with me going, in my work, when I work with clients, ensuring that I put forward ideas, even when making a pitch, that are practical. It can actually work in the context that, that we're working in. And it's something that people can do. So I'm very conscious of that. And that's that self-awareness. So much more conscious of it because I'm likely to think about the idea, think, wow, this is so amazing, but not necessarily think, okay, how do I implement that in a very practical way? So that's one example. I mean, another example that I can think of is that when I first entered into the working space, an assessment identified that I am very loyal and I'm eager to please and, I want to put in the hard work, which is all great things, but I might not necessarily be advocating enough for myself. And yes, part of that could have been of where I was at when I entered the workspace. Most people are learning and want to learn. But there was an eye-opener as well that I had to be very intentional to advocate for myself. Then when you're in a leadership position, to advocate for your team, and now leading People Smart to advocate for your team as well and for self, and being very intentional about that. So yeah, it has a significant impact if you are open to that process and just hearing what it says about yourself. It can give you great self-awareness on those things that you might not be aware of on the surface. And it allows you to then implement that. So it has been really great for myself. And I see it with a lot of my clients as well, where they realize, sure, I just didn't know that about myself. It used to frustrate me, and I now know why it frustrates my team. A good example is I encounter many leaders who are detailed thinkers. They're quite, I wouldn't say perfectionistic, but they love things to be done in the correct way. And that's wonderful to have high standards. I would say high standards and quality. The challenge is that if you're in a position, a leadership position, you have to be able to delegate, and people are going to give you different types of work. So you have to have a standard, absolutely, but then you can't place pressure on others. If your expectations might be a little unrealistic and it might not fit your realm, or you're not communicating that effectively. So what we often find with those leaders is they take it all on and they're doing everybody's work, and everybody's like, what's the point? I'm not going to do it. They just pass it on to them. And that's a personality thing that can be managed, to learn how to delegate, to learn what are the things I can let go of, what are the discussions or decisions that I take that are more strategic level, so I don't need to know the detail, and knowing and practicing letting go of that and saying, oh, okay, that's okay. That's a small thing. I can let go of that. But this is important. This I'll focus on. So that's another example and something I often do with many leaders.
So it's really interesting because what we're doing then with incorporating personality assessments into the recruitment process is we're actually setting the person up for success. We're setting the appointment up for success by saying this person has the right experience, they have the right qualification, they have all of this stuff going for them. We want to appoint them. And we know that there are going to be things that we've missed, blind spots that they have, that we can then coach, capacitate, and support them in to be the best version of themselves that they can be, right?
Absolutely, and that's leadership. And I think often we think that, especially moving into that leadership position, that's the same thing that people were doing before. It's a completely different role. Right. And so we have to treat it a completely different role. And what makes it so different is that, yes, you need to have the background knowledge and the technical expertise, but you need to have the key human skill set to manage and enable and empower people. That is a completely different role. And we need to see it as a different role. And part of that is understanding yourself, and leaders understanding the areas that they're really strong in, but also the areas that they're blind spots and areas that they can improve. And that's the developmental journey. And I think not just not only for recruitment, but also for talent management. If you are looking at a cohort of individuals that you want to, at some level, they should all be doing some form of personality assessment. And when we don't, we encounter countless examples of people who have been hired, they had the technical expertise, maybe they even had that experience, but then are struggling in that role, struggling with things of managing multiple demands, for example, at a senior level, being able to delegate to others, being able to communicate effectively, being able to communicate bad news and being avoidant because I don't want to do it early enough. There's tons of examples of how I engage with others, getting angry with others, shouting at others, blaming, shaming. All those behaviors come out. And if we know early enough, we then have a choice as an organization to say, okay, we can put this individual on a development program to grow those skills in that leadership position, or we can keep looking for somebody else that is more suited for the role, because a large part of that leadership responsibility is engaging, navigating, empowering people and your team. And so you have to get that right. And I've heard many leaders share with me, I'd rather get someone who's might not be as technically strong, but is able to manage their team and is a good leader than someone who has the entire skill set and is unable to lead effectively. And that's where the rubber hits the road. And that's what we often find in organizations. And when you do that, it's very hard then to go back. Not that you can't, you can, but it's very hard. And you lose a lot of money, time, even energy to then develop and grow that individual way. If you just had done it at in the beginning, when you onboarded that individual, it would be much easier to work on those areas.
And I think as well, it takes some of the subjectivity out of this thing, right? Because to be, and we'll get into this now, but I think the science around personality assessments has just evolved to such a degree now that it just takes some of the emotions, some of that subjectivity out of it and makes it a little more scientific. And so again, setting the person up for success, these are the 2 or 3 areas that we can really focus on to help this person to thrive in the workplace with us.
Absolutely. And you talk about scientific assessment, and in the beginning you shared there's assessments all over the show. I can go online and I can just do a free assessment. I think that's a really important thing. And I encounter many clients who say, yeah, we did this assessment. And I'll be like, that's not science, it's not scientifically reliable and valid. And I think that's very important, that we do not want to cause harm with any assessment that you use. You do not cause any harm. And so in order to do that, you have to select the right personality assessment for your organization or team or whoever you want to assess. And that assessment needs to be validated, it needs to be reliable, it has to, in a South African context, be the list of approved psychometrics to use for the Health Professions Council. And generally it's administered by a psychologist or psychometrist, and there has to be research done. So for those tests, you can actually ask for that research. You can find out what has gone into creating this test. What does it measure? You can find out the process that went through building that test. Is often developed by psychologists, and there's thorough research that's often done over years for that test. And then ensuring that there is a norm group. So often in the creation of the test, there's a norm group that is created within a specific context, and that is a benchmark group within, for example, a South African context. It represents that context, and it allows one to then say you are average, above average, below average in comparison to that group. That's really important. And if we just get any test without checking those requirements, then we can really create harm. We cannot then use those results and say it's measuring what it's supposed to measure. So it can be more harmful in the long run. So I think that is really important. When you select a psychometric to use, it's really important to understand what went into creating that psychometric, to look at that list that's available from the HPCSA, that it is reliable and valid and has been used within our context, and there is norms for it. Because then you know when someone is doing that the results are actually measuring what it's supposed to measure. It's actually showing, giving you a reflection of where that individual is.
And is that something that, as psychologists, for example, you will then consult with clients to make recommendations on? You would look at their environment, you would look at the industry, you'd look at the context and say, based on what you're looking for, this is the battery of tests that you should use, or the test you should use.
Absolutely. And that's what psychologists have been trained to do. They can provide that battery to support an organization within a specific context. And that's very different from just ordering something online or getting an assessment or saying it's been around for years and we can use this. It can cause a lot of harm. Also, even in the debriefing, often it requires a psychologist or psychometrist who has been trained over years on how to actually carry out that debrief with care without causing any harm.
Yeah. And I've seen this even when we've facilitated workshops together and we've debriefed psychometrics with people. There's always this kind of suspicion that people, I've noticed that people always tend to be on their guard. It's like, what's going to be discovered about me that I've been trying to keep quiet? That little weakness that I have, maybe something's going to be said, or I'm going to be exposed in some way. How do you manage that sort of tension?
It's a great question, Justin. And I think, again, this is where having a psychologist or psychometrist in that space who has been trained to manage that is very important. It's about upfront being very clear about what the assessment's being used for, that there will be no negative consequences from conducting this assessment, protecting confidentiality, knowing that those results are stored safely and that no one else has access to it. So being very clear upfront about it. I often use a lot of it for developmental purposes with leaders. So it's saying right up front that this is a snapshot of where you are in this moment in time, and there's lots of things that influence it. And we often focus on things that need improvement, the developmental areas, but there's also a lot of strength. So it's looking at that whole picture and then navigating it with an individual themselves, asking them, do you see this? Can you give me examples of where you see this? How do you deal with this? And then working with that individual and their results, so that it is not the scary big thing. It is just a mechanism to help us get greater understanding of ourselves and to work as leaders, especially. This is the work. It's our work to work on ourselves as leaders and to continuously grow and learn. And that journey never ends. So if you speak to senior leaders in organizations, they've done this countless times. And it's an openness to continue doing it. And there's many frameworks and models and so forth, but it's important to be open to that process, that it's going to allow us greater awareness, pick up things we might not have known before, address those blind spots, and gives us the opportunity to work on it.
So a question I have for you is around emotional intelligence, if we can. I know little deviation, but this is obviously a hot topic at the moment. Everywhere I'm going, everywhere we're reading, we're hearing about EQ and emotional intelligence. I want to know, is this something that we can measure? How successfully can we measure it? And is it something that is fixed or can evolve and we can grow EQ? I just think leaders would be quite interested to hear a bit about how can we make this thing a little less woo-woo and a little more scientific.
And it's interesting you used woo-woo. It is very scientific, and there are tests that are available and assessments that are available that have South African norms, that have the scientific research behind it, and are strong tools that can measure emotional intelligence. We can develop the skill set, unlike IQ, which might be a lot more stable, and by the time we're like 70, relatively stable. But EQ, as we grow with age, and that makes a lot of sense, we can grow that skill set, but also wherever you are in your leadership journey, you can grow it. And more research, like you said, is showing how having EQ skills is critical. It's critical to lead. It's critical for performance. It's critical for managing stress. Why? Because it's an understanding of yourself, that kind of self-perception, understanding of others. How do I engage with others? The interpersonal connection is how I manage stress. It's how I make decisions. It's how I problem solve. All those elements form part of emotional intelligence. And it's that individuals and a social skill set that informs how I make decisions in the world. And so I think it's a very important thing. And yes, there are assessments, again, similar to the personality assessments. You can find a whole lot of things about it online, but it's really important, again, to find the assessments that have this thorough scientific research behind it. You can find it on the HPCSA approved psychometric test list. It's often administered by psychologists and psychometrists that have to be registered and trained to actually conduct it. And it's one of the assessments that we do quite often. And I can tell you, for leaders, just hearing that I struggle under pressure with managing stress, for example, or I really struggle when I'm under pressure and I get angry, kind of impulse control. It is useful for leaders because they say, yeah, I do that. So then we can explore, okay, what are some of the things that we can do when we feel in this way, when we're facing multiple demands? Let's come up with strategies for that. And you can go on a journey with the leader to develop that.
And is that something that, as psychologists, for example, you will then consult with clients to make recommendations on? You would look at their environment, you would look at the industry, you'd look at the context and say, based on what you're looking for, this is the battery of tests that you should use, or the test you should use.
Absolutely. And it's seen it in that way, and for leaders to see it in that way as well. So if you're going on a development journey or you're going on a retreat with your leadership team or whatever the case is, it's always important to have that moment where I can do my leadership self-reflection in my work. And having a psychometric with a sound psychometric that you can be guided through is really useful, and just allows people to get a framework. Oh, this is where I'm at. And sometimes even a language on how to talk about it. I didn't realize this. I didn't realize that I struggle with this. So it can be very useful in those terms. And I always avoid labeling. We shouldn't be using terms to label people and so forth. But for personal development and insight, and for leaders to do their leadership work, because that's the only thing we can't control other people, that's a really useful and powerful tool for insight, and also for development, and to work on those things that I need to work on, but also grow the things that I'm strong in.
Right. So the obvious question, and you probably get this quite a lot, is especially when there is some urgency to making an appointment. I would think that's probably where it's going. It's too expensive. It's going to take too much time. We need to just cut to the chase, make the appointment, or go on that team building without necessarily considering personal development on a leadership level. What would you say some of the risks? What are the risks of not doing it? Right? What? Because it's an investment. We know that. What is the return on investment, and what's the opposite? What's going to happen, or what could potentially trip the process up without doing it?
It's a great question, Dustin, because I often get asked that by clients. And I always say, think about, not right now, but think about 2 years down the line, 3 years down the line, where you pick up something in an individual that you could not see in this moment. And it is significantly impacting how they work, how they engage with their team, how they're performing as a whole. It can have huge implications. I've encountered tons of examples of that. Last week, I heard an example of someone who got hired. They were really strong in the interview. They had a lot of experience at a high level, at the director level. And then a year in, 6 months to a year in, suddenly the wheels were falling off. The individual was just doing whatever they wanted to do. They weren't fulfilling their KPIs. They were screaming at other people. They didn't know how to manage the team. The team was down and out. And it had this huge effect on the entire organization, because as leaders, we have this positional power to really influence what's around us. The organization lost money. The organization had to go through a process of now going through exiting this individual, and it was really difficult. And I think in any organization, we can think of lots of examples like that. Whereas if we just assess right in the beginning, we can pick up things that can really help that individual along their journey.
So it's really it's the cost of not doing it, right?
Yes,
The cost of
exactly.
not doing it becomes really quite high, appointing the wrong person or not knowing what they need to function at their best.
Exactly. And it just equips organizations and leaders in, for example, often it's from the HR department space, but for leaders to then proactively work on that. So yeah, the individual's great and they're showing great talent and technical expertise and all sorts of things. They need support. They need support in this area. They need support with growing the skill, with managing the multiple demands, with not being defensive when somebody comes and gives them support, with engaging with their team, whatever it is, they need support. And then you can actively create a development plan and work with that individual going forward to grow that individual.
And I think it's also part of normalizing this conversation around the fact that we all have strengths and weaknesses. The potential that's presented by assessments like this is to help us see those things that maybe we were either not aware of, or that we were kind of covering up, or that someone else was aware of and we weren't ourselves. To be able to go, none of us is perfect. We need all the tools we can get to enhance our performance in the world generally, or in the workplace.
And it's seen at life, especially in leadership roles. I think it's all the resources you can access. Often leaders get thrown in the deep end and they have to just sink or swim. They learn from what they learned from previous leaders. And if you had an authoritarian leader, for example, you're going to emulate the same thing if you don't have any alternative role model. But leaders are just figuring it out. Whereas if we can have some form of structure, framework in which to help leaders and give them language in which on the areas that they're really doing well in, but also the areas that they need to grow in, and then developing a plan in which to grow those areas. It just supports leaders and supports your organization. It creates confident leaders to know that I'm self-aware. I know I can manage this. If I ever get into this position again, I often hear many leaders. For example, there was a leader who had a very short fuse, and now he has a strategy whenever he's under stress to manage that before he goes and speaks to the team. It's a simple thing, but it has such a profound impact on how the team views him, how he views himself, leadership style, and also the output that his team is able to deliver because of he's managing that.
Brilliant, brilliant. So just finally, and before I ask you for last words, clients can come. PeopleSmart is an organization that is equipped to deal with this. And I'm assuming that they can just have a conversation with you about what some of the needs are, even just to get your thoughts on it, so that you could start thinking about the right assessments to do for clients if they want to. I know they can access the websites and they can get more details, but I'm assuming that they can just pick up the phone and have a conversation and learn more about this from you, right?
Absolutely. And seeing it as part of development, leadership development, people development, it's a very important part of a broader developmental process. And that's how we often use assessments, that it forms part of a coaching journey. It forms part of a team development journey. It forms part of a leadership development journey. It forms part of a wellness journey. And so it's not just doing an assessment and leaving people. It's doing assessment and then working with you to grow that area and to build on those strengths that emerge and seeing it in that developmental way. I think that's really important. And of course, people can contact me. They can go to our website. It has a list of all the assessments that we have been trained in and are registered in. We carry out the assessment process. It can be done online or in person. And we do a debrief as well. And it forms a critical part of your people development journey.
Good, thank you. And it really heartens me to hear you talking about it as a piece of a whole puzzle. It's not just done as a once-off. It forms part of a cohesive strategy around people development.
Absolutely.
Thank you. This has been wonderful. Any final words?
Just thank you, Justin, and to all our listeners. Thank you for listening. And I look forward to hearing from anyone who needs support with personality assessments or psychometric assessments in general. And I hope that you found this engagement useful. Thank you.
Well done. Thanks, Tate.